right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're waiting. Dr. Carr is here. Everyone is here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I definitely don't want to start the program without acknowledging what some of the students right now are participating in. I'm not sure if they're still in the A building.
I think they locked themselves in.
They're still in the A building. So I definitely want to kind of send some love and support up the hill to the students who are occupying the A building, trying to keep them honest. Okay, so I'm so excited to be able to have this event because each of these brothers are individuals I have admired from close, like Dr. Carr, or from a distance, like Professor Williams and Professor Ball. So I'm definitely excited to be able to have this event. So basically the gist of it is all of us are kind of involved in hip hop studies on our campuses. 3 HBCUs here in the DC area. And so, you know, it'd be a good idea for us to come together and kind of talk about stuff. Hopefully at the end of this, be able to kind of move forward with collaborating more with stuff, because it's a shame we're all here in the area and we as institutions do not collaborate more. So Dr. Carr is an Africana Studies scholar, and he's the chair of the Afro-American Studies Department here at Howard, and he also teaches the department's course on hip hop each spring. T.O. Williams is an associate professor in the Department of Fine and Performing Arts at Bowie State University, and he's responsible for creating the Hip Hop Studies and Visual Culture minor, which is the only minor of its kind at an HBCU, so that, you know. Jared Ball is a professor of communication studies in the Institute of Urban Research at Morgan State University, and he's also the curator of the multimedia website I Mix What I Like. So you'll see kind of circulating information, a little bit more information about the speakers, how you can reach them on social media, specifically their Twitter handles, their blog sites and everything. So you can have that. Also, I want to announce a couple of events, and if you have an event that you know of, please let me know. So this Saturday is the event B Sound, which is going to be in Baltimore at the Gateway Media Arts Lab from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And the sister here in the front in the red, if you have questions, you can ask her. Also, I have flyers for the Trinity International Hip Hop Festival. It happens every year in Hartford, Connecticut, so it's a bit up the street a little bit. I teach the Hip Hop in Africa class in the spring, so we take our students, a group of students, every spring. It's a really small event. This year they're going to have some folks, MCs from South Africa, Cuba, China, Cape Verde. So it's a really nice event that happens every year. So again, if you have any other announcements, please let me know. So at the end. So this is going to be kind of, informal. I mean, hip hop is all about community, getting in. If you've ever seen a cipher, been a part of a cipher, you get to feel in the energy. And so I don't want it to be something where we're talking at you, but where we're kind of engaged in a cipher where we're talking. But to get some things started, I wanted to ask the panelists why it's important that hip hop studies courses and work are done at HBCUs, because we know many of the first courses and majors were done at predominantly white institutions. So why is it so important that this work is being done at HBCUs?
We're really good at mine.
Okay, well, first off, I'm really happy to see everyone, and thank you all for coming, and my students who are here from Bowie State. Extra credit. Right. So, it's and this is really great for me because I used to teach here too, so I've got some connections here to Howard. I always feel like everyone else is studying us but us, and in a sense of whether it's hip hop, whether it's jazz, whether it's the blues, whether it's gospel, salsa, whatever. I always feel that we haven't really been focusing on taking our culture, often which is exploited, often which is sometimes used against us. And so I thought it would be great to really turn the mirror on ourselves. This billion-trillion-dollar industry, this world phenomenon that we know as hip hop culture that's influenced and inspired so many. So honestly, it's just really looking in the mirror. And this, for me as a professor, it really came from my students. We were sitting around having not really a cipher, but just having a conversation. We were like, yo, this should be a class, professor. So it was really the students that drove this hip hop course for me and the interest in terms of looking at hip hop stuff.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
and inviting me, and thank you all for coming. I think it's important. I mean, I think it's important to teach anything at an HBCU or to an African descendant audience that will help expose all of the still existing contradictions and hostilities and antagonisms that we still have to deal with. For me, I've always had a problem with, you know, I love what my generation did in helping curate, develop, promote, evolve hip hop, but I've always had a problem with one mistake I think we made, in part because we inherited a lack of organization after the fall of the Black Power era and all of that, that we never, I think to this day, fully properly organized around anything. And then hip hop itself, I think, fell into that existing political vacuum and has in some ways had its narrative reframed and told and in a way that's anti not only its history but the people that have produced it, and it's created more mythologies that we still have to deal with, and I think we'll get a chance to talk about that going forward. So for me, any chance that we get to say, you know, so really my point is I've never really fully agreed with the idea. I really like how you started, that we have to study ourselves, because I think a lot of what has happened with the isolation of hip hop has been an attempt to divorce it from the African experience, to deracialize it, if you would, and to make it something that is not just open to everyone and can be performed by everyone and appreciated by everyone, but that is something that is everyone and not specific to an African experience that existed in this country. And I think anything that we can do to reset that history, and then again, as I started off by saying, to really revisit and challenge the existing contradictions that we have, we need to use that, and hip hop is a great vehicle for that.
So yeah, I'll just continue that conversation and echo the thanks to Professor Clark. Dr. Clark, I think I always hesitate on saying the first time something has happened, because I found out that it's usually not the first. But to my knowledge, at this moment, I think this is the first time that this has even been attempted. So thank you so much, Professor Clark. She introduced herself. How long have you teaching hip-hop in Africa class?
This is the third year,
Okay.
third spring.
And of course, research, scholarly interest in the subject very broadly. And it builds out here at Howard something that, to my knowledge, had not been attempted before, which is taking hip-hop beyond the shores of this country to really look at it as a global phenomenon, and that's no small thing. In the context of, and you're right, I mean, in the context of a subject that has become kind of a boutique subject at HWCUs, and it's cute to talk about it. Let's go get Ninth Wonder, or let's get Nas, you know, which kind of gives a sense of how this is sometimes being framed. It's kind of like the zoo, right? You know, we can study lions, and we can get a lion and get them to roar and take a picture with it and say that we've been engaged in studying the lion. I mean, that's kind of a white college approach in some ways. This is the white college approach to ethnic studies, black studies, Latino studies, women's studies. You know, it's carnival-esque. Not all of it. There's some great hip-hop scholars here, which I talk about in about 45 seconds, and I go say much more except to say that, like, these students who are now occupying the ABIL, they come in the wake. It seems like it's maybe a 20, 25-year cycle. It's been about that long since, 30 years now, closer to 30 years. When we met about a few years ago for the 25th anniversary of the Howard student takeover of 88, 89, when they were like, Lee Atwater is not going to be on the board of trustees. It kind of accelerated the leaving of James Cheek, who ironically came to Howard because the students in 1968, which was 50 years ago, took over the ABIL, and it was like, okay, we need the black universities. It's like, it's about time for this thing to happen again. But as they did that in 89, it was during what some people call the golden age of hip hop, right? We shy away from periodization, but you know, Biggie was around campus, Diddy, who I guess wasn't in the building, but somewhere on the premises. And others, I mean, but that's just the beginning of that great life, high life, let's go spend money and pour Moet over everything. You know, Craig Mack getting ready to help Diddy in that regard. But that's on the verge of that. Public Enemy, Queen Latifah is still coming out, you know, with the Native Tongues, Jungle Brothers, and everybody black as hell. And the students at Howard were the ones who convened a hip hop conference on this campus. Timothy Jones, April Silver, and it was connected to activism. So, Doc, what you're doing is this is beginning something, as you say. Now it's time for us to do exactly what y'all said. We need to have retrospective now. and it's time, and all those people are begging to come home. So maybe, you started something now. I hate to say you got the good work reward, but more work now. Maybe it's time now to have that week-long gathering, and because what that did at Howard was then encourage other black colleges that were organizing. I just played for my students in hip hop class, Stetson Sonics, AFRICA, the Africa, because the anti-apartheid movement, hip hop, all that stuff, student activism, HBCUs, we were looking to DC at Tennessee State like, okay, what are we not boycotting? What are we not buying anymore? I mean, it wasn't the white schools, it was the black ones. So last thing I'll say is, it'll take a little bit longer than 45 seconds to get to the point I'm gonna make, is that when I started teaching this class, I guess in the early 2000s, it was because, as you said, students was like, we need to have this conversation. That's why I'm too old to do. If I was too old then, I'm too old now. So I approached it the only way I knew I could approach it, which was through an Africana studies lens, which meant let's look at the intellectual genealogy of hip hop. So by expanding the concept to include what happens in any moment when cultural modalities are at work and black people are creating. So Louis Armstrong is hip hop in some ways. He's not hip hop, of course, but what was the label they were using to describe the modality of that moment?
Bebop.
Right, Dizzy Gillespie is bebop, right? So we talk about that in class, right? I mean, bebop wasn't the name of it. Bebop was because they were moving so fast they didn't give songs titles and say, well, let's play this. And the white were like, oh, bebop. It's like hip hop. In other words, these are labels for African modalities. So that's how we approach it in this class. And they had another conference here, and some of the scholars who write about hip hop came. I don't want Jerry to bust out laughing when I say this name, but you probably will too, and you too, Dr. Clark. But one of the panelists, James Peterson, was referring to, no, it was accurate, I'm just telling history. But I did set you up by saying you was gonna laugh, and then you laughed. Because I'm laughing too, thinking about it. They had a hip hop conference here on this campus in the early 2000s, and I was using, it must have been 2006 or 7, because I was using Jeff Chang's book, still do, Can't Stop, Won't Stop. I used that book very deliberately, because that's a book we can deconstruct and construct at the same time. Yes, and they tried to defend Jeff Chang. James Peterson tried to defend him. Oh, Chang is a good brother. I said, I don't care whether he's a good brother or not. It's a black conversation, and I ain't mad at him. Obviously, we're using the book. But I paired that. When did you publish That Mixed What I Like, Jerry?
2011.
Okay, 11. When that book came out, I put that book in. Jared was gracious enough to come and talk. Use Jelani Cobb's book, To the Break of Dawn, because I approach it like, we don't read enough, we don't discuss enough, so it's time to put this in conversation. And I think that we're at a point now, a point of departure where you've called us into this space, and maybe it's time now for us to figure out how to bring all these elements together and do something with it. So thank you, Dr. Clark, for doing this. And I know you're the only sister. Is Kokava here? Kokava Selassie. She's at Coppin. When she saw when you tweeted it out, Kokava was like, where are the women? I said, woman, put it together, I ain't there. She said, I'm coming. And then it snowed and messed it up. So I know Kokava is one of the many women who are engaged in this work who wanted to be here. Velma LaPointe, by the way, a black woman, was the first woman I know, first person on this campus to teach a hip hop course, which I think in the School of Education, which was in the early 2000s. So I'll stop there.
Well, I definitely appreciate the comments, which helps me get into the next question. And after this, I just have one more question. I'm going to open it up because I know people have stuff that they want to contribute. But you guys are all not only hip hop professors, hip hop scholars, but you're also activists. And so, just based on your comments and on your work that you do in the community and outside of the classroom, does hip hop culture have a role to play in community activism and mobilization? And if so, like, what's going on?
I mean, yeah, the short answer is yes. Everything has a responsibility. And this is sort of, again, been one of my problem is probably too strong a word, but one of my slight issues with this whole thing over the last 20 some odd years is that hip hop has been, for good and for bad purposes, isolated and given a responsibility that that is undue it and unjust it as itself. It is a cultural expression of a people. That's it.
Right.
It's not. So in other words, if you are a jazz artist, if you are, I don't think whatever your cultural expression is, you have a responsibility to have it play a role in the struggle for your people. And I do fall on that side, by the way. I think anything, I don't believe in, art for art's sake, and I don't believe in anything for anything's sake at this point. Given the context we're in, everything needs to be put in the direction of liberation. So, so yes, it has a role, but one of the problems that is presented in trying to be a quote unquote hip hop activist is that these contradictions become clear. In that For instance, hip hop as a nation, as it was often called in my generation, was insufficiently analyzed as a colonized nation and led and still leads to a lot of confusion. So if you don't put in the part about the colonial relationship of this hip hop nation to the state and to everything else, then you lose sight of the fact that, again, just like with everything else, we don't control it, we don't own it, we don't benefit from we can't make it popular. This is a big misconception. As much as we may like a Kendrick and whoever else, we have nothing to do with their popularity.
Wow.
Nothing. So we can't control it and we don't benefit financially from it. So we have the same, hip hop as a nation has the same colonized relationship as any other nation to a mother country, and all of our communities have to those in power to this day. I'll stop here. Huey Newton was right 40 years ago when he said that the intercommunal relationship is the issue. We don't have any nations to which we can decolonize anymore. Every nation, from Ghana to Nigeria to the United States to hip hop, was a colonial creation, inspired, if not fully led, by a European imperial project. So Black America, hip hop, Panama, Ghana, Nigeria, none of them are authentic to the human populations coalesced in those geographies and in those names. Nor is this hip hop nation authentic in the sense that it is a response to a colonized situation. So to the extent that we don't understand that, we fall back into the same thing. So that's why today, materially, Black people around the world are worse off than we were 40, 50 years ago, despite producing the billions through hip hop and everything else. Because we don't make the money, we don't control it, we can't invest it, we have none of it. And then the fame is used against us to promote mythologies about what this country can do and what this world can produce for so-called oppressed people. The one more point I wanted to make, since you mentioned Louis Armstrong, one thing we have to remember is, just like he was, and jazz was the precursor to hip hop, jazz was used by the state in the same exact way.
That's right.
So when she was running for president, people kept talking about the super predator thing and all that. And I kept going back to what Hillary Clinton said when she was Secretary of State. And she said openly in Al Jazeera Press, we're going to use hip hop to promote the image of the United States around the world, just like we did in the 50s with jazz.
That's right.
So the same thing, jazz is great, our people are brilliant, but we don't control it, we don't have any power, so the same art is used in the same way. So we send hip hop artists all around the world, they promote false images of what this country is and what it is not, and then that fame is used against those of us who would try to become activists and say, wait, there are problems here, we need to struggle. We don't need to struggle. Got Kendrick on TV, Beyonce's on TV, everybody's rich, everybody's happy, Diddy's making money, they're throwing money at the screen, why are you complaining? Well, wait a minute. That's the point. So if none of those people control those images, none of us control those images are constantly, to this day, used against us and work to weaken our ability to analyze and understand our situation and organize it out of existence.
I would just listen to Jerry. I'm taking notes, and I'm thinking just how the unrealized potential of these kind of conversations. This is why you have HBCUs. There's really no other reason to do it. And that's because it's not only about the discourse, the dialogue we're about to have, everybody jumping in and having these conversations back and forth. It's about the level of study it takes to connect the dots. And we all don't have to connect the dots the same way, but we do have to have the study to be able to understand that there are dots to connect. Because as you were talking, Jared, it came to mind, that line KRS-One has in Classic, right? This is hip hop. We're a nation. Don't you want to hear more KRS on your radio station? Wait, is that a contradiction? Because what you just framed, those two things don't go together. Maybe the revolution is basketball, but or do they? Because I'm thinking about some of these new theoreticians who are not working in black spaces, but who are talking about black spaces as if you can construct them out of nothing and claim them as black spaces, as activists know. Fred Moten, for example, who I enjoy reading when I think I can understand him. It takes me to slow down and read and understand. But Moten's whole notion that this undercommons, that blackness is about, the expanding possibilities beyond the political, it's all political in some ways. It's a political project. Natalie Crawford, whose new book, Post-Black Blackness, argues that blackness exceeds activism in some ways. The black arts movement, frames some, but then blackness transcends that. And I'm thinking, y'all always trying to escape busting somebody in the mouth. And part of that is because you get your check from white spaces. You know what I'm saying? So you got to create a blackness that allows you to defend your existence. I'm not mad at you. But there's a political nature to all scholarship. So when you were talking, I'm thinking about in this conversation, this is a conversation you can only have in a black space. And that's because if you don't have it in a black space, you're challenging the white space. And so, you know, that tension between the State Department, when you mentioned Armstrong, because I mentioned Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie, who were both used by the State Department to go around the world. Gillespie is, you know, South America. You know, Louis Armstrong goes to Egypt. That's that famous picture of him with the trumpet at the Sphinx, and Louise is sitting there. Oh, that's the State Department tour. And then he gets mad on the tarmac when he's supposed to go to the Soviet Union or everywhere else because, what's the white boy in Arkansas? Orville Faubus, in the Little Rock Nine, you know, he won't let them kids go to school. And Louis Armstrong on the tarmac on the State Department tour says, you know, it's a shame. Eisenhower needs to go to Little Rock and grab that black girl by the hand and walk her up the steps into their school. And the State Department said, oh, this was the Tom, this was the Negro with the handkerchief. But he went off script. And the State Department all of a sudden realizes, and this is where I'll close on this, the question of activism, at least, because I appreciate you giving me that time, but I ain't got too old. And not too old to be an activist in this sense, but I remember something that an HBCU president told me many years ago, I respected, who was an activist. He said, faculty should not be so directly involved in the activism of students that it makes them into decision makers for those students. He said, in fact, he used the word despicable. He said, I find that despicable when faculty use students for things they should be fighting for. That's one of the reasons I try to keep in contact with, but not be heavy-handed in conversation with these young, because y'all not about to blame us and say, oh, that wasn't their idea. But no, hell no. You know what I'm saying? We're here, but we're not gonna do that. So activism for me, you know, it's a lot of things I'm involved in, but I'm saying this to say that this is where I was going at the end. When you see a form of activism that involves deep study, and when we start connecting dots, then you go out and do what you think needs to be done, but you have a better sense of what happened the last time we tried to do that. And just like Armstrong on that tarmac, when KRS-One says that, you know, we're a nation, don't you, we're here to erase it, there are unintended consequences to black people occupying any space. So somebody listening to the radio took over a building in the 80s and 90s. Some people listening to Stetsasonic AFRICA learned that there was a place called Angola and Botswana, and then all of a sudden they find themselves clerking for Trans-Africa. Next thing you know, they ain't even back to this country. The unintended consequences of people who try to put words and messages and images and movements, you can never tell when somebody is going to become something based on something they heard or saw or experienced. And I think that is one of the bridges in terms of hip hop and activism that we can foster in this black space where we have these conversations with somebody right now and saying, oh shit, let me go look that up. I think that's one of the roles that we
This is the entire time, because you guys are going back to '88. We protested at Morgan State, locked the doors, the same exact thing. This is like the cipher, the circle comes back again. In terms of this connection with activism, I think for the purposes in our classes and what we're doing at Bowie State, sometimes it's just remembering, sometimes it's just kind of reminding students where this began. I mean, even this huge protest we had a couple of weeks ago, I mean, it all begins with students. South Africa, you know, here in the United States, HBCUs. We think of any major movement, you all started this. And so it's great to have an opportunity in a black space such as an HBCU where we can actually not only study hip hop. I used to say, you know, that gets the students in the door, but hip hop is sort of the lens that we're going to look at to kind of contextualize, you know, politically, culturally, economically, what's happening to our people. But no, I think in many ways we've disconnected this social activism from hip hop. We've separated. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking like '88. Damn, I was listening to KRS-One, Public Enemy. That was a soundtrack for Morgan State's protest. It was PE. I mean, that's just what we were listening to. I mean, but in many ways, it's sort of kind of reminding students like, yes, it starts and ends with you guys. You all are the change that you seek. And so I think hip hop, if it's hip hop, if it's jazz, if it's gospel, whatever, if it's reggae music, it's just that constant reminder of your power politically, socially, culturally. And so, but yeah, I think it's really important to sort of look at the politics of hip hop culture and remind ourselves that, yeah, this is very much an activist culture. You remove that, it's kind of like where we are right now. Where, I mean, what's the soundtrack right now for, you know, this whole gun? There needs to be a soundtrack. You know, what's the soundtrack in the 60s, a soundtrack in the 50s? What's our soundtrack for if it's gun violence, if it's immigration, if it's police brutality? You know, what's our soundtrack? Because trust me, they don't want us to hear it.
All right, so I'm actually gonna hold off and open it up for questions, but I want to open it up with a comment, a statement that I'm hoping that especially the students who are here are really fully able to appreciate the fact that taking a hip hop course at an HBCU, oftentimes our students come into the classroom, you know, repping Cardi B and, and
Yes,
Bodak
yes.
and all that stuff. And when they come to a hip hop class, they're thinking, okay, we about to listen to songs the whole hour and just kind of talk about how dope so-and-so is. But this is what you get when you come and sit in the class, and the hope is that by the end of the semester that you are able to take an Africana lens to examine what you're listening to and to be able to understand what you're consuming, because you're consuming it.
Right.
And so by consuming it, you need to understand what you're putting into your mind. And it's not to say that you can't listen to Cardi B, but you have to understand the social and political and economic realities around an artist like a Cardi B. So I want to open it up for questions.
I actually heard you speak before, actually.
Oh,
There.
Crown Forum?
Yeah, I've been listening to your speeches.
Oh, man.
Especially what you said about changing the context of like the more colloquial version of Hotep and kind of like reclaiming our things. So that was really powerful for me to get that off.
Appreciate you, brother.
I guess my question is a little bit of background. I'm proudly under one of the best professors in the world I ever taught, Dr.
That's what I'm talking
Tia.
about.
He's I'm the first ever hip hop and visual studies.
He's our first student.
Yeah.
Hopefully more coming. Thank you.
But hip hop has meant something to me, kind of saved my life and everything. I was listening to Nas, Tupac, everything. Traveled around, always listening. I've been in Paris and they was blasting Drake, running through the six of my woes, Like the French people, the Parisian boys were bumping that. And went to Israel, they was blasting Tupac and Biggie on the beaches and everything. And this is like in 2011, so
Wow.
it was just really right in Atlanta right now. I've done like TED Talks on hip hop. I've have my own record label. But the main thing is that one thing I'm kind of seeing, and I want to ask you guys because Dr. Carr said something important about not being so heavy-handed in terms of younger generation. And my question is, I swear there's ageism going on both sides in a sense. And in terms of of course, yeah, definitely, we don't want to be blasting nothing nonsensical, but the same point is not just the Kendricks and just the J. Cole's doing things, There's the Wale's, there's the King Loses, there's the Rhapsody. So how do we best, for anybody can answer this, kind of work towards ending some of the ageism within the older and newer generations to keep the same evolving energy of hip hop alive?
Doc, you in this too, right? You can stand the whole time. I mean, I didn't even stand all day.
I'm just gonna say something real quick.
Yeah,
From the
please.
African studies perspective,
Come on.
it's been a struggle. I was able to teach or create the Hip Hop in Africa course in a department. I love my colleagues, but it was kind of like, okay, hip hop really, like African studies is really kind of the folks who were first out to publish got it wrong. And so then it became a whole nother generation of hip hop heads turned scholars that, are trying to kind of write that narrative. And so I think they humor me because we want asses in seats.
Right.
So they're like, okay, your hip hop course is popular, so we will, but when you engage in a conversation, you're able to point to the social, economic, political impacts. And what happened in Senegal a few years ago where the artists were active in overthrowing a president, getting him voted out of office. Like hip hop did that. And so that has helped my cause to show, look, so there's ageism, I think, within academia, within African studies. African American studies, with people like Trisha Rose paving the way, they've been able to kind of do that. With African studies, it's been a lot more difficult. But yeah, the ageism, I think, is
She paved the way, and then she came back and paved over all of what could have been progressive when she came back in the hip hop wars. So this is like you gotta look at. Seriously, look at the political differences between Black Noise and Hip Hop Wars.
Yeah.
It's like two different people wrote the book, and it's like the Trisha Rose that wrote Hip Hop Wars didn't read her earlier work.
Right.
Anyway, this is not about her. This is I think.
No, it's important, man.
But one of the problems that I have is that hip hop academics don't battle. That has been one of the issues. That has been one of the issues I've been trying to advocate for a long time. So even when I was doing radio, I invited Jeff Chang, I invited Carr to Toronto.
You did, didn't you?
Because because I I think they're all good people. I just think that they're wrong on a lot of ways that they approach. And to be fair, they think I'm wrong, and that's fine. The problem that I have is that, well, to the extent I don't want to suggest that there's an equanimity here that they give it a damn about me as much as I probably have to give a damn about them. But I mean, there are levels and hierarchies here, and there are people who are supported differently than others. But the one point I didn't want to make though is that again, hip hop is not special here. There's an attempt by those in power, by the state and its institutions, to divorce people generationally. So it's not specific to hip hop. So for instance, one of the things that I do in my classes, all I try to do is I borrow something from a professor that I disagreed with years ago, but one thing we always agreed on, I love that he said, you must interrogate your preferences. So my approach is to say, in my class I want to say, how do you know what you know and why do you like what you like? I don't want to condemn what you like, but I do want you to analyze why you've reached a certain conclusion. And one of the ways I try to do that with music is to try to just go through and identify the process by which an artist is signed and promoted and made famous. And it has nothing to do with their talent. It doesn't mean that they're not talented. It just means that their talent isn't why they're promoted, is not why they're signed, and is not why they're made famous. Fame itself is political, and the fact that these institutions target young people specifically, 12 to 18-year-olds. So because they know I'm not going to be driving around at 45, 46 now. Something does happen. I don't want to listen to a 20-year-old tell me about his life. I don't want to listen to it. And it's not a diss. It's not a diss. It's just being honest.
It's like you ain't listen to the 8-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, when you live another 20 or 25 years, I don't want to hear a teenager telling me about his first love, and I don't want to go through that anymore. I'm not interested in it. So they're targeting my daughters. They're targeting so that they listen to something I'm not listening to, and then they separate us. They have the oldies channel, and then so LL just he's taking over Backspin on Sirius. He's got the old school channel for people like me.
Yeah.
You aren't supposed to listen to that, and my children aren't supposed to listen to that. They want us all separate, and then they divide us up and they feed it. This is how all institutions do it. This is how all media operates, and this is why we have these. So again, it's not specific to hip hop, but hip hop does suffer it because it is being produced by people who are colonized. And anything we do, we could give up hip hop tomorrow. Anything we create next is going to suffer the same exact process because the political relationship has not been changed.
I would add to that and broaden the conversations in terms of sometimes we talk about hip hop and we're only talking about music, we're only talking about rap. And I'm a filmmaker, I'm a visual artist, so we talk about the other elements of hip hop. You know what I mean? B-boy and breakdance and graffiti, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's beyond just rap. You know what I mean? And so you guys, I was at a high school last week. Shooting a video, I saw a young brother, and I said, "Oh, I'm teaching hip hop." And he's like, "Oh yeah, Biggie Smalls wasn't that great, man. Meek Mill is the best MC in the world." I was like,
free Meek Mill.
So now I could have argued with the young brother.
No, you can't argue with
but we were. But the point I wanted to make is that I laugh because I said we have to embrace these. Obviously, my generation, your generation of hip hop will be night and day, but at the same time, where do we find this common ground? And so I'm gonna invite the young brother to our class at Bowie State, and I'll tell him we'll have a little debate about that. But going back to this whole thing of battling professors, one thing that pisses me off is there are a lot of folks teaching about hip hop that don't know a damn thing about hip hop, didn't listen to it, didn't grow up with it, and I have an issue with that sometimes because sometimes I've said around like, yo, this person, the people who are scholars that I know that really never really listened to this. It's something we grew up with, you know? And so, I mean, you can always pick it up later. But the thing you actually alluded to earlier, Msia, which is the global aspect, talking about Senegal and Africa. I always like to begin our classes in Africa, and I like to end in Africa. Right now we're focusing, we really haven't gotten that deep in hip hop. We've been focused on signifying and the African oral tradition and the blues and where all of this comes from. I think we were talking about Nancy and Legba and all the other African deities, and so how all these things connect. So it's about looking at these connections beyond just the music, in poetry and vernacular, in the study of the African oral tradition, obviously in the visual arts, in fashion. I mean, damn, we influence the world, you guys, right? We are the influence of the world, and so we look at fashion, we look at film, we look at other mediums, and how they intersect with business and the commercial aspects of it. But definitely the global thing is probably one of the most powerful things in our course. I actually learned from my students what's happening in South Korea in terms of hip hop, what's happening in Cuba, what's happening in Senegal, or Saudi Arabia, wherever. And how often, as you mentioned, in Senegal, how often hip hop, again, is that soundtrack of political discourse. It's the soundtrack of challenging the system. What is the Arab Spring? When I'm in Israel, I hear Tupac. When I'm in Senegal, I hear Wu-Tang. And so around the world, it's almost like they get it sometimes and we don't. They understand the power of this music, the political power to change lives. And it is the soundtrack to liberation, to standing up to oppression, to white supremacy. And so, again, looking at the global aspects, looking at other elements, other aspects of how it intersects with what we call hip hop culture, I think and reconnecting with the younger generation, I think will be important.
HBCUs are by nature deeply conservative.
Mm.
So what we're talking about, and I thought about it as you were talking about the fight to even establish that course in African Studies. One of the reasons they kind of leave us alone here in Afro-American Studies is because we're able to flip the script and get a critical mass of people together who don't care what anybody thinks. But HBCUs have benefited from that energy. Just like you said, they want the numbers. So, and they want the credit for being a space that they're not, but they want to confine and constrict that space so that it doesn't overrun the tiny places where it exists and kind of fuels. There's no reason for black colleges to exist except this kind of conversation. But it has to be localized at those spaces because people who run the places and the kind of critical mass people who are in charge are deathly afraid that this will become the conversation. At which point now you got to declare war against white supremacy, and we just can't do that. I need that 50 cents. I need that money, right? We know it at the house, brother. I mean, I appreciate, Dave Rice and them cats trying to push against the borders a little bit, but that ain't the way the whole place is, right? Right. We know that. So I said it to say this. I think part of our opportunity in this conversation is to create networks so that we can maximize those localized spaces where this is the conversation.
Absolutely.
And let me just talk about here at Howard, right? Because Msia's here, I ain't got to do that. I could send students there, or we get together, and then we can cover. Mine is a very localized notion. At 53 years old, if I'm gonna think about being a teenager, I'm gonna think about when I was at the Fresh Fest in Nashville and LL Cool J showed up on a couch talking about I need love, and they turned to the romantic, right? I came in LA, I'm bad. Now he's like, I need love. We all standing there like, because that was when he was battling Kool Moe Dee, and Kool Moe Dee standing in front of the tour bus. Nobody know who he is. He just standing. I'm saying, and to me, I always pick Kool Moe Dee over LL. But apparently, the media and the complex wanted him, and so of course now he works for the Kennedy Center and getting honors and things like that. But anyway, resistance and incorporation. But I'm saying to say in my class, it's two very basic splits. We do the genealogy, because I'm always trying to think about how do we shrink this world down to fit some concepts. So one of the things we do in Africana Studies is we haven't yet figured out methodology. People are talking about post-disciplines, and I'm like, no, we want to linger in disciplines for a little while. But not in terms of subject matter, in terms of technique. So when you talk about that question of Africa, we spend the first couple of weeks dealing with modalities. How do we change the language? When you say graffiti or tagging, what do you mean? That's an inscription system. So the question becomes, how long have Africans been inscribing? Then we talk about hieroglyphs, then we talk about any written form, clothing, so this is just an extension of that. These are inscription systems, right? When we talk about b-boy and b-girl, what is that? That's movement. Yeah. So how long have we been moving deliberately? And then we take that, and then so once we've created different categories, we then begin to theorize what that looks like in moment after moment after moment, trying to create a genealogy. So then the rest of the class, we haven't quite gotten there yet. Some of the students are here, Natalie is here, a few other people. What we do now, once we've gotten the genealogy, we can begin to theorize and tear apart and put back together and this kind of thing. Now we say, because Chang's thing is organized around loops, right? 4 loops. So then the assignment I had with students, which is why Jerry's work is so important, and we use Jelani Cobb also to play a little bit, but also to reveal the constraints. The assignment becomes, okay, we gotta do some more loops. Because I love the loop concept. The loop concept is very African. It's not linear, it's backward and forward in time, how these things connect. Chang, I think, even Africans understand it better than Chang does. Chang says generations of fictions. Yeah, that ain't no, the Egyptians had a phrase that translates my heart of different ages, meaning what? I was 16. So I get it, you ain't been 53 yet. There's no crime in that, but you ain't 5 years old either. And when you get to 53, you will have been 5, 16, and 53, and you never lose any of those hearts. The Egyptians understood that concept. So when Jeff Chang says generations of fictions and we have loops that go backward and forward, okay, that's cute. Let's theorize that in the context of the way Africans have thought about time and space. Right. So then the next assignment becomes, Okay, how many more loops do we need?
Right.
5. You need 2 more loops, 3 more loops. But your assignment now is to fill the loop using the modalities we've used with all those people you like. And that's where that question comes in. Why do you like what you like? And what I found is by the time we get to that, we've been immersed so deeply in the other forms that all of a sudden, the fashion of the moment, you ain't just thinking about it in terms of now. You thinking about it last time, black people, okay, wow. And all this, then Pharrell doesn't become so alluring when you think about producers, wait a minute, combining people to sit down and have a conversation? Oh no, Pharrell ain't the first to do that.
Right.
And then it becomes okay, now is this guy going to stand up against your long genealogy? Some people do. And that's when we start the conversation. And again, I don't pick winners and losers. I just want to hear the conversation.
Yes.
What I found is typically, I hate to say it, but well, let me stop there. Let me stop there.
Since you posed the claim that that hip hop is controlled by outside sources, do you worry that our image as Black Americans is being tainted towards our brothers and sisters, in the continent and on the Caribbean, because this image that they try to portray, it has nothing to do with everyday Black American?
I always tell it this way. There's the only thing I've ever really liked that I read in one of John Lewis's books, his memoir. I'm not. I mean, is that he told a very truthful story in one of his memoirs. He said when he was the head of SNCC in 1964, he went throughout Africa, taking SNCC lead, meeting all the African leaders, and he said every stop they made, where they had met with someone who had previously met with Malcolm X, they said every leader told them, if you're anywhere to the right of Malcolm X, we don't even want to talk to you. Malcolm X had become the international standard for Black politics.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow.
50, 60 some odd years later, look where we are. And in part, this is because of the promotion of something else.
Yes.
So it's, again, not just specific to hip hop. The same way Malcolm had to be assassinated so we could end up with Jesse and then Obama, you have to get rid of Maimouna Youssef so that you can have Cardi B. I mean, it's not that I'm dissing Cardi B, it's just simply to say you have to recognize the difference and recognize why one is promoted over another. It's the same thing, I've even tried to argue this with my hip hop academic colleagues. I'll even put it this way, there are times I know I've been invited somewhere, not because I'm the best, but because the people doing the inviting think I will serve their specific political need.
Absolutely.
If I'm not aware of that and I'm just walking around thinking, oh man, they can't wait to hear me. I mean, that's silly. That's silly. And artists have to do the same thing. Why are you being put on the radio every 5 minutes? Is it really because you're that good? Or is it because you are promoting something that those who are sponsoring you want promoted? And that's all I'm saying. So it's not, that's it. So yes, there is a definite intent, and that's what Hillary Clinton was admitting. She's saying, the whole world is looking at this country and saying, look how you treat these Black people. Look how you treat these brown people. What? Send them on a tour. Put them on a tour. We did it before. We've already learned this lesson. They see Black people playing trumpets. They're like, oh, how bad could it be?
That's right.
50 years later, they see Black people rocking the mic, and some of the more progressive political artists get sent that don't even get put on the radio. That's the hustle, too.
Yeah.
So they even send radical artists that you never hear on the radio.
That's right.
And send them around the world, and people think, that's what's rocking in the United States? How bad could America be? And then they come over here, and you never would see those artists ever again.
Right.
So yes, there is a definite intent, because look at what's happening on the continent. Everybody's raping the continent. Everybody's exploiting the Pan-African potential relationships have to continue to be distorted. So that radicalness of Malcolm going to the continent has to be interrupted. So now it's 50 Cent going to the continent, or it's whoever else going to the continent. And no disrespect to them, but that's just politically something very different than Malcolm. So yeah, yes, it is happening. We should be beyond worried, because it is directly linked to the material conditions of Black people all around the world, this negative image, and it's designed on purpose.
And you made me remember something, Brother Gerald, that there are actually hip-hop ambassadors working for the State Department. I know a couple of them. Tony Blackman and Dumi right here. So actually, and then some of the dope.
Brother Asheru from DC.
Right.
Brilliant artist, Tony Blackman, brilliant. Never gonna be on the radio.
You probably never heard of them. And so, yeah.
But they're out there. I'm sorry.
No, but I just disagreeing with that. I mean, you would never hear of these folks, and so it's challenging. And the other thing is, you hear this term, politics is local. I say music is local. So if I go to Senegal, if I'm in Ethiopia, I want to go to the hip hop spot. Where your MCs, where your poets, where your dancers. And so that's one way responding to the sisters, really kind of connecting, in that way. But often, there is obviously this disconnect many times, but I mean, we have to travel. We've got to, as people of African descent, we have to travel. I try to travel as much as I can. I learn quite a bit, good and bad, but at the same time, probably one of the most positive things I would say in my travels is that, they're listening to the conscious stuff. You know what I mean? That's two places, two music I always hear wherever I go, two people. It's either Bob Marley or Tupac. I mean, wherever I go, I could go to Mars, Tupac, Bob Marley. I'm gonna hear those two names, And I'm like, why Tupac? Why? I mean, of course, Biggie did that, but why those two? But there's, I'm in Israel, I'm in Palestine. I'm not even speaking the language, but they knew the language of resistance through Bob Marley or through the music of Tupac for some reason. And so, Wu-Tang. I remember I was in Senegal. I see big Wu-Tang, like deep in Senegal, written on a wall. So I think that I really look globally. I want to challenge my students to think a little bit globally in terms of what's happening. Who are the dopest artists in Cuba right now? Who are the dopest artists in Brazil right now? Who is the sister that just got killed in Brazil right now? And how does her movement connect to hip hop and the MCs that are down there as well? So I think, yes, there's definitely, this kind of commercialism and this separation, ages and class, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, we really need to seek out those local MCs, those local artists, even right here in DC. One of the big criticisms I have, I don't know if you guys heard that the Kennedy Center has this new hip hop center, but not one DC-based hip hop artist like Asheru or Tony Blackman are part of this council, and that's problematic. And that's one thing I always try to do is to try to, I mean, even in our class, we talk about go-go music too. That's another African music that we try to connect with because we want to make it local. So I just challenge folks when you travel, go find those MCs, go find those artists that you're not gonna hear about, and have those conversations.
It seems that Europeans have the control over who or what is seen as popular in the culture. And it's not that we don't have black artists who are creating the music that we need. Like, for instance, the person that comes to mind is Baltimore MC Lab Tech One, who comes out of the paradigm of black consciousness in the vein of Dr. Khalid Muhammad and Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. So to me, it just seems that, sorry, I made a note for myself so I can, for instance, like, I know Khalid Muhammad, one of the things I remember him saying is that, I forgot which video it was on, but he was asked about whether he is a committed person to African people, and he said that African people need inspiration and information, which I think is what hip hop culture is for. And earlier you said that fame is political, which means in turn that obscurity of certain artists is also a tactic to maintain the system of white supremacy. So how do we counter that?
So first, I would want to say I don't know, because everything, and I say this, and sometimes I'm criticized for it, but I think it's important to be honest. Everything I've tried to do has failed. So it wasn't that it was wrong; it just didn't work. So one of the things that I used to try to do was try to use before the digital world took them over, the mixtape. We were trying to develop that as an alternative communicative network in DC, both journalistically and musically, to show that there's a different kind of journalism, there's a different kind of music, and around that we can create a separate public sphere. And then that public sphere, once created, we can politicize that, organize it, and start another part of the movement. That was the fantasy, and I think those kinds of efforts still have to be attempted. The intent to control popularity is done to blunt the agency that we have and demonstrate on a daily basis. There is a recognition that through all this oppression there will be resistance. So there's a constant need to attempt to find ways to reframe that oppression, reframe even attempts to resist, so that people, from their perspective, don't go too far. We have to just be mindful of that and recognize not only that we have our own agency and our ability to challenge things, but that those in power know our agency, I think, more than we do even. And they're more organized and have developed in this country a propaganda system that we have never seen and I think don't fully understand yet. What goes on in this society the ability to promote and adjust consciousness from a handful of remote people and digitally upset our entire media environment. It has never existed like this before. And we have not yet caught up to that analytically, or certainly not organizationally.
Right.
So again, I think we have to go back to the basics and say, everything that has been done, we have to try again. And it's not that the things that we tried and failed aren't right. They just have to be tried again and again and again. As we've all learned, revolution is a process. We have to constantly be engaged in it. So we have to find ways. How can we find ways to create new public spheres that are separate intellectually and physically from the mainstream, and then to politically organize in that space.
But do you think in that space, if you are able to create those public spheres, that the masses of Black people would engage in it?
It's not. I don't think we can work at it that way.
Okay.
And so I will borrow from the Black Agenda Report version of journalism. We have to target a specific audience, a small specific audience, and look to organize that before we try to talk about masses and major movements, all that. So my whole thing is, how do we find the people that more or less already agree, and then organize with those folks first? And then that's the only way we can create something that would be attractive to any other group of people, I think, at this point.
So it was either 96 or 97, they had the Million Youth March in Harlem, and there was another one in Atlanta. It's like they split. Khaled was in Harlem.
That was 98.
Was it 98?
Yes.
Something about. Man, let the years converge.
Wow.
These converge. 20 years ago. I didn't know Khalid Muhammad well, but I knew him well enough. He's an interesting guy. And the fact that you could say, I don't remember which video, speaks to, is that, I think, 12 years old? 12, 13 years old? There was a time we used to fight. In fact, the first time I met Jerry up in Founders Library, we were talking because Jerry, he was delivering pizzas and hustling. This is before y'all was born, so y'all know nothing about this. He didn't know your mama knew. And spending money at everyone's place, right? Buying cassette tapes. We remember a time when it was gold to get a tape with John Henry Clark or Francis Cress Welsing. I remember battling trying to get the pamphlet, The Crest Theory of Color Confrontation and White Supremacy. I mean, you get from, maybe you could get it in Baltimore at everyone's place, Hakeem's on 52nd Street in Philly, but I was going to Harlem. I was going to Una Mozak, Hugh Mozak's daughter, Marcus Garvey's the captain of the SS Book T. Washington. She ran Liberation Bookstore. I would go up there and spend hours just talking to Una, whatever they had in there. My point is that it's a very different world now. All that stuff is on, you do this and it's there. That's good in the sense you have access. It's bad in the sense it's an information glut, but I'm going somewhere with this. Khalid and the Million Youth March, coming in the wake of the Million Man March, the Million Woman March in Philadelphia for Late Chansu and them when they pulled together and all that. I kept everybody's kids, right? So all the sisters could go to the Million. My godson, who is now graduated from Howard. Boy, anyway, my point is that there's a genealogy, there's a mix there of all this work that's going on. So so, Jerry, when you say we can't go at it that way, we can't look at it mass. I think about an HBCU, a deeply conservative place that has seen serial insurrections. When you get a critical mass of students who want something different, as you say, who then at certain moments attract people who are willing to take risks. This is where I'm going with it. It happened at Howard in '68, 50 years ago. The students said, that's it. To the point where they even exceeded the boundaries. I mean, they attacked James Neighbor. This is a Negro that argued Brown versus Board of Education. We don't give a damn, you're a Tom now. I mean, when we start thinking about ageism, man, they attacked this dude, man. Wow. I mean, and I'm not saying Brown was right or wrong. I think it was wrong. But at the moment, he came out of a segregated space when all the people who were doing all the heavy lifting at the collegiate level were black people who were at HBCUs. So the intellectual firepower that brought that movement into existence, students and faculty, were from segregated institutions. Then these students come along and say, that ain't enough. They demand this become a black university. The concession is a young cat out of North Carolina, James Cheek, who then comes and hires a young Vice President of Academic Affairs, Andrew Billingsley, and says, go out and find these young black professors to make the black university. That's when Joyce Ladner is brought here. That's when Walters is brought here. That's when maybe Suleiman was brought to that same, right? Suleiman Young. I mean, in other words, let me go get some young people. Yes. It ain't everybody. But when they get here, they say, how can we study systematically black life and black conditions? That's when Ladner puts together The Death of White Sociology. If you ever get that book, look at the people who contribute to that book. Many of them are HBCU faculty, including Howard faculty. These are the young people who are writing now. And they go get one old head who they give the first chapter, E. Franklin Frazier, who contributes after he dies. Joyce Ladner said she had to go to the house and get the manuscript from his wife. His last essay, The Failure of the Negro Intellectual. Because what Frazier says is that all these years, I went to a conference in Africa, and the only people talking about the race problem were the American Negro. The Africans and everybody else talking about life and philosophy and how we move as humans. The black people from America talking about, he said, all these years I realized, damn. Why do I say all that as it relates to college? Because the purpose of an HBCU in a moment like this is to have a space where we can not only talk about Khalid Muhammad and Frances Cress Welsing, who was on this faculty but didn't get tenure because she was left out there in the wind. She was in that thing too.
Okay.
If we're gonna have a black college, it's gonna mean something, and it's gonna be in the context of hip hop and this broader conversation. We have to now go back and look at what Brian Walters and Joyce Ladner and them were trying to build. Pick it up, critique it, analyze it, and then continue a very systematic study of what, as Jerry said, what we can learn, and then we disseminate it, maybe to the masses if we can. But at this age, I'm not worried about the masses. Why? Because people having babies every day. The energy we have now looks like the 80s when I was, y'all, the age of some of the people in this room. Chad Boseman. I'm not mad at Black Panther. I think it's weak. I'm a Black Panther comic book fan, so you know what I'm saying? I mean, all the stars, people have already forgotten it, right? So I'm like, was that a great song? I don't know. I'm not playing it anymore. It's great. I don't know. But my point is this. Chad Boseman worked for 2 years at the House of Kemet.
That's right.
Right on Georgia Avenue. Baba Rafu and all them guys, you know what I'm saying? Tahuti and them.
Yep.
I'm saying a HBCU is where you go beyond the flash of the websites and the clickbait to sit down and see, can you construct a genealogy on how you train people? Because I think that if Ryan Coogler gets a little bit more under his belt, Lupita and them decide to make a little left turn, y'all give these Negroes millions of dollars on a budget. If they slip something in, it's going to be because they learned it at a place where people weren't worried about the masses. They was just trying to get it 15 people. And then one of them Negroes got a budget. That may be a fantasy.
Absolutely.
But Ava DuVernay was African States major, and I think one of the reasons she didn't make Black Panther is because Disney was like, nah, hell no.
As a product of an HBCU myself and my entire family, up to my great-grandparents, everybody went to HBCUs. How do you all feel about how Hollywood is projecting HBCUs? Because I personally am offended by the quad over and beyond belief. I personally am offended by a certain other movie that was made, but the filmmaker's my friend, so I'm trying to be professional because I know this is on record, so I'm trying to be quiet. But he know I don't like it, and he fussed at me, but whatever. How do you all feel about how HBCUs are being filmed via television? Because I feel like it's being very negatively portrayed, and I've never been a fan of BET, never will be, and I definitely see that through the show The Quad. BET is definitely not owned by us. Right. And if we have a platform to show HBCUs, despite what people believe, I still believe A Different World did an outstanding job in showing not only the downfalls, but more importantly, the upliftments of HBCUs. But then you have shows like The Quad. I don't see nothing but negativity from the first episode to the episode the other day. It's nothing but negativity from the staff, from the professors, from the money, to the students, to the athletics, and all schools have all of these problems. It's not hardly just HBCUs. I graduated from Prairie View. I can tell y'all 20 stories in 5 minutes about the nonsense with Prairie View, but at the same time, it's way more things to say positive about it. And I'm just wondering how you all feel about Burning Sands and The Quad. Because I decided to change my mind and say the name of the film.
I teach film and animation in addition to hip hop. So I mean, my own thing is sort of challenging the narratives. I mean, you don't like it, we're gonna make our own. So the goal, and one of my biggest mentors is still here. Highly agree, Mr.
Oh, yeah.
Baba Highly.
He's probably in the basement cutting film right now.
He's gonna curse me out that I'm not gonna see him. But the whole point
is,
he
will. Yes, if you come see him, he's gonna curse you.
He's gonna curse me out.
Don't matter.
But so the thing is we have to challenge the narrative, and in terms of the images. My whole thing is I don't see it's. it's kind of like now all of a sudden people are talking about HBCUs. It's almost like we were ignored for many, many years, and now all of a sudden, I think it was some LinkedIn interview the other day, like, wow, HBCUs, like, oh, the hot thing, maybe it's Chadwick, maybe it's Black man, I don't know.
Trump.
The Trump effect, yeah. But so my whole thing is really, to challenge us, to tell our own narratives as producers, as filmmakers, as artists. We need to definitely, yes, BET, i.e. Viacom, definitely doesn't have our best interests in mind. But I think certainly the true story of HBCUs has not been told. It's up to us to actually tell them and tell these stories and encourage our students. And it kind of, I want to connect this back because I'm seeing this. I'm sorry, on my phone. It's like HBCU protested. So this is all.
It went viral already.
Yes, it's all connected. Yes. And what a great time to have this conversation about HBCUs. Again, we were having this conversation about, we talked about Afrofuturism a couple weeks ago, and really how I went to a conference in New York, Afrotectopia, where we were focusing on really the HBCUs. It really starts and ends with us, in terms of the scholars and intellectual power that's out here. It starts and ends with us many times. So I agree with you, sister. We need to challenge those stories by producing our own narratives of what the HBCU experience is.
Well, real quick, what I was addressing, because I'm founder of Mecca International Film Festival, and it's registered under Ava DuVernay, and I'm one of her founding members, and blah blah blah. That's just a shameless plug, because right now I'm not really her fan right now. But anyway, I'm just gonna be real. Like, whatever happens, happens. But I do understand that we do need to support our own narratives, which is what I'm about in full bloom. But I'm ready for people to start giving out better narratives.
True.
Because it's mighty interesting that they're showing it in such a negative depiction. At the same time, the schools are being shut down left and right. So I feel like this is being done on purpose, which is why I don't support it.
Yes.
And when my own people are making these narratives, indie or not, I could care less. It's unfortunate, and it's even more unfortunate for the students to have to see it, and then they have to go home and tell their homeboys on the block, yeah, that's why I ain't go to HBCU in the first place. I don't want to go through that, and then they have to sit there and defend to their family and their friends, and that they go to HBCUs and they're proud, but you looking on TV and you looking in film and looking on Netflix, people looking like, why would you be proud to go to HBCU? Y'all broke. People stealing money, blah, blah, blah. Folks getting raped. Look what you got to go through. Kids dying, pledging, all of that stuff. And it's just very, very unfortunate how irresponsible we are being via film.
I'll actually, because I think we're running out of time, so I'll close by saying this, that first of all, again, thank you all for coming. Thanks for hosting this. Thanks for having me. I think that, I put something on, talking about shameless plugs, that I mixed what I like.org a little while ago, about C. Dolores Tucker being right. And one of the things, C. Dolores Tucker, an imperfect person, no question, was absolutely right back in the day when she was arguing that hip-hop was being taken over by corporations and turned against us and being used to, but hip-hop turned against her. Talking about the age thing.
Yes.
My generation totally got this wrong.
Isn't that something?
We totally got it wrong. From KRS all the way down to
Instead of
Tupac.
fighting us, why don't you go free with me?
That's right. And Tupac telling her to go fuck herself. All this type, all this stuff. Because they misunderstood the point. Like, our generation missed the point. We were so busy defending the rise of this cultural expression that we lost the sight of our relationship to this society. We don't have control over our product. What Tucker was saying is all the corporations are doing, because what is a corporation? It's organized white supremacy, organized capitalism. It allows people to rule in anonymity. It's as Robert Reich says, a legal fiction. It's just, they're not spooky. They're just mostly rich white men who hide themselves in anonymity and collectively invest. By the way, if you just do this, I did in my class, just real quick. Just see if you can find out who actually, the number one institutional owner of almost anything is a hedge fund whose name is escaping my, I knew it was going to happen as soon as I started to say it, is escaping my, But when you look up, when you look up this hedge fund, you can't even find out who's in it because it tells you the people who are in this hedge fund are the people who invest in this hedge fund. That's what the website says. You can't even look at it because you can't invest in it. Your money's not in there. But they own everything from Netflix to AT&T to Apple to Google. They are the #1 institutional investor in everything. And my point in this is, what are they doing? They're doing this in anonymity so they can influence and promote what versions of stories and narratives become popular, part of the popular culture. And as it impacts black people or hip hop, they will constantly look to promote the same sort of stories and images and what Walter Lippmann has said years ago was a white supremacist self-defense mechanism. They have to promote negative images of blackness as a self-defense mechanism to promote their own false sense of superiority. And then, of course, in terms of political economy and materialism, they needed to make capital work. The capital can't flow unless they're investing in something. And they're not going to invest in something that's going to make you look good, that's going to make me look good, that's going to make Howard look good. They're going to invest in something that's going to tell a story that they are comfortable with. And this I'll end here. And this is what Tucker, I think, understood that we still have not figured out. Just because it's popular and just because it's black does not mean that you are the intended audience. This is what Tyler Perry's career is based off of. This is what I think what got Ava caught up. This is what got Kubler caught up. Is that they are being told to make movies. They're being encouraged, influenced to make movies that appease white audiences, not black audiences.
That's right.
Fruitvale was for white audiences. Black Panther was for white audiences. Creed, damn sure, was for white audiences. These are not so. A story about an HBCU on Netflix is not for black audiences. It's for white audiences who want to see stories about black people that will not challenge their sense of what it is to be white. So we're never going to see anything else until there is this political revolution. We're never going to see popular media represent anything differently. So the only thing we can do is find pockets, produce something, try to create public spheres around it, and organize around it. Because you're never going to be able to produce something that's going to be able to match a Disney product in terms of popularity. And we shouldn't even try. And it's not because we aren't inferior, it's because politically we're not organized and we don't have the resources to do it.
All right, so we're gonna have to stop there. I wanna thank the panelists.